Welcome to MidLIFE Matters, where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Tammy Sneed, the Director of Gender Responsive Adolescent Services with the Department of Children and Families, State of Connecticut, who will shed light on sex trafficking with children. Thank you so much, Tammy, for being here with us.
My pleasure.
This is a complex, critical topic. To start, what are some of the laws that govern?
There's two sets of laws that we look at when we're working on a trafficking-related case. One is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. We call that the TVPA, and that's the federal legislation. And in very short summary, it tells us that adults and children can be victims of both sex and labor trafficking, and it provides a number of kind of standards to meet those thresholds. Okay. In Connecticut, we have legislation that very clearly articulates if a child's under the age of 18, he or she cannot be charged as a prostitute. They are a victim of child trafficking. So that was a really important step for us a couple of years ago, because prior to that, we were doing under 16. Okay. So now we're looking at children under the age of 18.
Which I would think is so important. Between 16 and 18, people can still be so vulnerable and unaware of maybe consequences of decisions they're making.
Absolutely. When you look at all the research, even young adults into their late teens and early 20s, they're still developing and still can get into circumstances that are not good for them.
Why is the language used so important? And I know we don't use the term prostitutes. Correct. It's victim, right? Correct. Why is that so important?
Because it helps us as a community, as a society, to realize that these kids are truly victims. When we use the word prostitute, we're blaming that child. And sometimes we're using the word prostitute with adults that are also victims, and that's not accurate. And there's some interesting data that tells us that 70% of adults in the life were victims as children. So it really puts us in a different playing field when we're working with kids, when we're not using language that labels them, that accuses them of being the perpetrator of anything, because they're not. We're talking about adults buying sex from kids. Very simple, and that's against the law.
Even in terms of what term we use for the violators, right?
We try to use trafficker or exploiter. Correct. We're trying to get away from the word pimp. Kids know that term, so we will still often use that when we're connecting to children, particularly law enforcement connecting to children, because when you look at modern music, when you look at TV shows, pimps tend to be idolized. And you'll have kids in school saying, I'm going to be a pimp when I grow up. There's books on how to be a pimp. So we really, again, wanted to change our focus and realize that these individuals, they're trafficking our young people. They are victimizing our young people, and minimizing what they're doing doesn't help the young people or society in general.
Sure.
Also very similar, we don't use the word John. So when we're talking about the buyers, we're talking about a buyer, we're talking about a child molester. It's not just protecting the kids, it's really changing the mindset. That's the challenge. If our adults in our world are seeing child trafficking as something that's okay to do, we have a really big issue. Some of the data suggests that there's well over 1 million buyers having sex with kids every given night. We're talking about children being bought for sex.